Thank you everyone for joining us. And now it is my great honor to introduce our Executive Director, Leonard Garfield, who is going to tell you more about our illustrious speakers tonight. Thank you, Leonard.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and good evening, everyone, again on this kind of smoky night. So I'm glad that we're all huddled together safely indoors. This is MOHI's first ever democracy dialogue, intimate conversations that explore history and current challenges facing our democratic system. Before we begin the program tonight, I want to take a moment to acknowledge, as we always do at MOHI, whether we gather in person or remotely, that we are on the historic and contemporary lands of the Duwamish, the Suquamish, and Coast Salish people. We acknowledge the forced displacement of Native communities while honoring the endurance of the Duwamish people who still live here today. I also want to note that tonight's program is taking place at the same time as unprecedented protests against police violence towards Black people. These protests in our community and across the nation are a call to action for each of us to state that Black lives matter, and MOHI stands unfaltering with those who are calling for justice. Tonight's Democracy Dialogue is part of MOHI's larger fall initiative called Stand Up Seattle, the Democracy Project. It's a larger fall initiative that takes a close look at this extraordinary year, at the traditions of democracy and the current state of democracy in our community today. As an educational institution, MOHI is committed to bringing historic perspective and information to a wide range of topics from a wide range of civic and political officials, seeking to inform and build civic literacy, but of course never endorsing partisan issues, candidates, or campaigns. Stand Up Seattle, the Democracy Project, is supported by the generous, I should say, of the Boeing Company, Real Networks, Amazon, the Washington State Historical Society, contributors to the MOHI Exhibits Fund, the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, the Smithsonian, our very special sponsor, Maureen Frisch, and tonight's special program sponsor, For Culture. It's a lot of people, and we have a lot of thanks to all of them. You know, one of the most interesting aspects of American history is that when the Constitution was ratified in 1787, the framers never specified who was eligible to vote, and they never established a uniform system of voting. That most fundamental element of democracy, the vote, was left largely to the states to determine. And over the years, as some states gradually expanded suffrage, the nation's constitution was amended to ensure that the expansion was guaranteed, in theory at least, for all citizens. The adoption of the 19th Amendment in 1920, whose centennial we are celebrating this summer, was the single largest expansion of voting rights in American history, women's suffrage. It literally doubled the size of the American electorate in a single stroke. But earlier and subsequent amendments expanded the electorate as well, including the 15th Amendment that extended voting rights to Black men, the 24th Amendment that abolished poll taxes and other financial barriers, and the 26th Amendment that extended the suffrage to all citizens 18 years and older. Of course, none of those federal amendments truly did away with voting suppression or other roadblocks to participation. And once again, the states have played a key role, sometimes in restricting voter participation, but other states have in fact led the way to greater access. And Washington State has been key among those leaders for increased access. We were among the first states to adopt women's suffrage at the state level, 10 years before the national amendment was adopted. And in recent years, we have extended voting by creating one of the nation's very first vote-by-mail systems for all elections across the entire state. Today, that smart approach to broadening access to voting and encouraging greater participation would seem to be exactly what is needed everywhere as we continue to perfect this democratic experiment. But this year, in the face of pandemics and protests, voting by mail has become a focus of concern, of controversy, and sometimes of confusion. As a result, our local and state election officials are no longer just hardworking but largely behind the scenes, but have also become frontline workers, ensuring that the most sacred of rights, the right to vote, is protected for each of us. Tonight's program was conceived many months ago, and I'm honored to introduce our two guests who currently serve as the senior elections officials in our region. In 2015, Julie Wise was elected Director of Elections for King County, one of the largest vote-by-mail counties in the world with more than 1.35 million voters. In Julie's 25 years of service as an election administrator, Julie has worked for increasing accessibility and security in our elections. Welcome, Julie. And Kim Wyman is Washington's 15th Secretary of State. First elected in 2012, Secretary Wyman is serving her second term and is only the second female Secretary of State in Washington's long history. Prior to being elected to this office, Kim served as Thurston County Elections Director for nearly a decade, as well as Thurston County Auditor. Welcome, Kim. Thank you both for being with us tonight. I will come back after your chat, which I will listen to anxiously off stage and facilitate a question and answer period. But for now, I turn it over to Julie Wise and Kim Wyman.
Well, thank you, Leonard, and good evening, everyone. I'm Kim Wyman, Secretary of State, and Julie Wise and I are just so excited to be here tonight. And I can tell you that as a longtime election official, we kind of consider ourselves election geeks. So the idea that people would like to learn about what we do is very exciting. And we thought we would just have a conversation rather than another Zoom, PowerPoint teaching you something, that we would just sort of talk back and forth about our perspectives at the state and the county level. And tonight, I just realized that between the two of us, we have over 50 years experience running elections. That doesn't make us not at all. But Leonard and Rachel, thank you so much for having us tonight. I think this idea of the democracy dialogues is just perfect. And I know that a few years ago, I got to visit Mohi and got a wonderful tour from Leonard, and he was kind of talking about this idea. So it's really fun to be part of the inaugural event that kicks this off. So thank you for putting it together. So just to sort of kick off our conversation, I think most people realize that right now, vote by mail is in the center of, I guess, arguably what could be called a firestorm, as 2020, is going literally here in our region and across the West, firestorms raging around us, and vote by mail is kind of in the center. And Washington has really been pushed to the forefront because of our experience with vote by mail and the fact that we moved to it almost a decade ago now. So I guess we should probably start by explaining to you how our elections works here in our state, and it's a decentralized system. The actual ballot counting and distribution, it happens at the county level in our 39 counties. And I'm going to turn this over now to Julie Wise to talk about what happens in King County and give you that introduction, and we'll come back and talk about the state.
Good evening, everyone. It's so great to be with you. Thank you so much for joining us this Saturday evening to talk all things vote by mail. It's true, 39 counties across Washington state are really sort of boots on the ground running the operations of the elections. So everything from managing our voter rolls to ensuring that voters get their ballots and that we count them when they come back, tabulate them, those returned ballots, and of course we're responsible for producing results. Counties are also managing and working with candidates that want to run for office, working with our jurisdictions across our counties to make sure that their issues get placed on the ballot. So you really see at the county level, each of the 39 counties are really sort of boots on the ground, doing the operational work of the day-to-day running of elections and then conducting the elections themselves. Of course, we couldn't do it without the Secretary of State's office, though. We really work with the Secretary of State's office to ensure consistency across our counties. We often seek guidance from the Secretary of State's office. They do some audits of the election offices as well. In fact, King County is up for an audit, a 5-year audit this general election. They help convene the counties together so that we can share best practices and provide training. Sorry, Kim, I realized I just said what you do, but anyway, so counties are really more sort of day-to-day operations of the elections. They're tabulating ballots and have the wonderful opportunity of getting to work with our voters, our customers. Kim, what do you do?
You actually covered most of it. I think to add what to Julie said, one of the things I'm most proud of here in Washington is this relationship that goes back decades between the county election officials and the Secretary of State's office. It really is a partnership that not every state has. And I've had the opportunity to see other state secretaries of state and election officials. And I can tell you, this is not necessarily a given in other states. And so I feel really fortunate and blessed that we can work together so well. And, I think one of the real examples of that, although I'm not even going to mention it by name because it might give both Julie and I a little PTS, but we worked on improving and modernizing our election system, which was getting 40 independently elected officials to agree on something and to work together to produce a really, state-of-the-art system that has had its bumps. But I mention this because, again, I don't think that this is something that happens easily or frequently in other states. And I think that that's one of the things, even through all of the pain and suffering that we went through for that project, that we're really well positioned for 2020. And we're working together in ways that we just haven't been able to in a long time. And that's exciting. And so I think that this partnership going into 2020 is really going to serve our voters well. And as we look at how we got here, I'll turn it back to you, Julie. But a lot of states are not even close to us in vote by mail, and I'll get that national perspective in a moment. But Julie, why don't you talk about King County's road to vote by mail and kind of how King County ended up being where it is, and some of the improvements that really came from switching to that system?
Yeah, Kim, I think it's really interesting when you look at the history of Washington State, really at the forefront of so many things in regards to elections, right? I was just thinking this the other day, Kim, about our Secretary Wyman, sorry, is that we were one of the first to have online voter registration, one of the first to do motor voters. There has been a very intentional approach to how we conduct and how we run elections here in Washington State. And we're fortunate that we've had Secretary of States and other leadership here in our state to really make sure that we are well positioned going into this presidential election. But King County has been vote by mail for a little over a decade. Our first vote by mail official election was in 2009. But when you think about it, over 80%, I believe the number was 86% of our voters had already been registered as permanent absentee voters. So while we officially became vote by mail, but in 2009, we know that a lot of our voters, in fact, were voting absentee, as we saw in the chat box earlier this evening, have been voting for decades by vote by mail and all over the world. And so King County officially went 11 years ago. And I think our voters really appreciate the opportunity to have that access. And I think that was the question. A little bit of the history, Kim, on vote by mail for the statewide. It was much longer than that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And our path, I think, as a state really started in the early 1990s when the legislature allowed any voter to become a permanent absentee voter, as well as allowed counties to do certain elections completely by mail. And I think that was where we really started to grow as a state, because you had some counties that were really aggressive at building out and promoting absentee voting. And by the late 1990s, we're seeing 60% of their voters choosing to vote by mail every election. And from a state perspective, where it really came to a boiling point was in the 2004 governor's race. And Julie and I both have battle scars to prove we lived through that. And it was, an experience that I wouldn't wish on anyone, but our state came out of it better, I think, because of it. And what we learned from that experience was we couldn't do both types of elections simultaneously as well as we needed to. We were using resources to staff polling places and make sure we had all of the availability in-person voting to any voter who wanted to choose to do that, as well as a full-blown vote-by-mail election. And, I think that people look back on that election and they have different points of view, certainly. But what you can remember, or what I remember, and I'm sure Julie does as well, is first and foremost, we had problems at the polling places and vote-by-mail election. We had polling places that had provisional ballots that were counted that shouldn't have been. We had multiple counties across the state who had ballots that they kind of misplaced and found after election day, even after we certified. And of course, all of that became very, very front page news and very politicized. We had, I think, 12 lawsuits against the state that were filed in that election. And of course, we had 2 recounts statewide and a 6-month-long court case. And so I mention all of that because what we really learned at that time was, one, it was tough to do 2 elections simultaneously, but more important, excuse me, is that you have to have good controls. You have to have good internal controls. And because we were trying to do so many things at once, be everything to everyone, you couldn't do anything well. And so what we learned coming out of the bruises and bumps of the 2004 election, and when the legislature gave us the authority to choose to vote by mail, I think counties were really strategic in thinking through how they're going to move forward. Particularly, I would say probably 35 counties, if I remember correctly, right out of the gate switched over. And this was the point in time when we were adapting to the Help America Vote Act, which was federal legislation from the Gore v. Bush election. And what we really were working on was trying to figure out what was going to be the best service levels, and spending a lot of money on equipment for polling places that looked like they were going away didn't make a lot of sense. But there were a handful of large counties like King, like Pierce, that really needed time to ramp up. They couldn't just flip a switch. And I will flip this back to Julie and she can talk more specifically. But they had been under-resourced, they had been understaffed, they didn't have the proper space and equipment to be successful. And so that was actually such a strategically smart move on those counties' parts. And it still took, after we wanted to move as a state, 5 years for the last county, and that was Pierce County, to move to vote by mail. And ironically, that had more to do with politics than it did with building out the security controls. But I think this is really relevant today because we have these states that are having to ramp up absentee balloting and vote by mail. And I think King County really has a lot of great lessons to share. And I'm sure you have been sharing, Julie, with your counterparts, because I've certainly been telling your counterparts how great you guys are. So why don't you share with everyone what King County has done in the years since and why vote by mail works here?
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think that, in the last few months, probably 20 different jurisdictions have reached out to King County, have reached out to me to ask how they can move to vote by mail. And we've seen, I think, over the years as a nationally certified election administrator and talked to our peers, our election administrators across the country who so desperately want to go to the Washington model, right? They want to be able to run accurate, secure, and accessible elections. And it really is nearly impossible to be conducting 2 different elections, because that's really what you're doing. When you're preparing for 8,000 poll workers, 700 polling places, the sheer amount of training and equipment and time and resources that it takes to be able to staff those polling places, printing ballots when you have really no idea what the turnout is going to look like out at those polling places is a lot of work. And what happens is that you really separate your resources and you really limit yourself with having to focus on 2 complete separate elections. The absentee, processing all of those ballots when they come in and mailing those all out, as well as the polling place sort of lift for operations, is incredibly hard to do. And so we see election administrators, at least my experience, Kim, is that desperately would love to go to vote by mail. They see how secure and accurate it is, and it becomes more political. It's more of legislator or to make those decisions about moving the state to vote by mail. And so I know a lot have reached out and been, I've been a little bit optimistic about this sort of being the tipping point for vote by mail, because that's how much I believe in it. I have a little bit of an interesting, like many in Washington state, I have 20 years of elections experience here at King County, 10 years polling places, 10 years vote by mail. So I've really seen the benefit of our organization moving to vote by mail. And I so badly want that for my fellow election administrators across the country. And they want it so badly too, and a large majority of them do. Again, because they see how accurate and accessible vote by mail is. And so 20 so different jurisdictions have reached out over the last several months asking for our help. And we have provided all sorts of resources to be able to help our fellow jurisdictions move to vote by mail. You know, in some ways, Kim, I've been kind of, going back and forth in this. I think in some ways, election administrators are some of the most resilient people and the most innovative people I've ever met in my entire life. Here are individuals that are running elections in the middle of a tornado or hurricane, or are required, according to their laws, to suddenly have to do an election in just a few weeks. And so this is a group of individuals that will get it done, and will get it done well, even with limited resources and limited time, because that's what we're familiar with. And then at the same time, you sort of, kind of think that, is it too fast to implement something that many of us have worked on for many, many years to get here? And so I think it's a delicate balance. I think there's some jurisdictions that have been able to move to vote by mail ahead of the presidential election and will do really well at that, probably because of the number of absentee voters that they've had already signed up. So I think that there's a lot that jurisdictions are looking to Washington State and to Oregon and to Colorado for assistance and help as they move to vote by mail. We've really found ways in which to provide options to voters. And I think what we've really shown the country and the world is that you can have both security and accessibility. It's not an either or. And that's what I love about vote by mail. I literally could spend all night. I think we decided that Kim and I could sit here for 5 hours talking about vote by mail. That's how geeked out I am about it. But I really, truly do believe in the process and in the system. I think we'll dive a little bit further into that. Kim, I know that you have gotten a lot of calls from across the country as well around vote by mail.
Oh yeah, yeah. And what's just hilarious and ironic is because, as Julie mentioned, we've had the real benefit of being in a number of trainings nationally and conferences and things with our peers. And I can tell you, as late as a year ago, state election directors, and one in particular in a state I will not name, New Jersey, that would give me a really hard time about vote by mail. And the state election director here in Washington, Lori Agino, is equally as election geek as Julie and I are. And so our peers made fun of us about vote by mail, because we would always joke that the solution to everything is vote by mail. If you didn't know that, it is. And I'll explain to you why. You talk about, we can't find enough poll workers to work the polls. Vote by mail. We can't, whatever it is, whatever long lines.
Find facilities, find accessible facilities, ADA compliant facilities, schools, right?
Yes, we don't have enough poll locations. Oh, vote by mail. Oh, we don't have electronic poll books. Vote by mail. And they would make fun of us. And of course, my favorite moment in life was when the New Jersey governor and Secretary of State decided that they were going to do their primary election by mail. And my good friend and election director there had to call and ask Lori and I for help. And I'm sure we shot to Julie as well. So it's been an interesting evolution nationally, because I can tell you, the further you move east, the more rare absentee ballots are, the more rare vote by mail elections are. This is certainly a Western phenomenon. And going back to Leonard's points earlier, there's a real parallel to women's suffrage and women getting the right to vote in this country. If you look at the early states and early adopters of women's suffrage, there is a direct correlation to vote by mail elections as well, which makes me very proud as a Westerner. But I think the other thing is, when I look back at 2005 in my county, when I was still at the county, the hardest decision I made as county auditor was moving to vote by mail, because it was a county by county choice. And I had to recommend it to my county commissioners. But it was absolutely the right one, because at that time we were having trouble staffing our polling places. We were having trouble, and we only had 70. We had trouble finding those 70 polling places. And we were now going to ask our workers, who on average were 65 years old or older, to run voting machines that they would have to, clear jams of, possibly replace paper or printers or whatever. And it was just too much. It was too much pressure for them to be successful in a, whatever 12, 15-hour day that they had. And so I think that brings us up to today, as we're looking at this global pandemic and how it has completely adversely impact our ability to not only have just a normal daily life, but how to conduct an election. So one of the things that I was really fortunate to do in the primary election is I got to go up to King County on election day. and was just blown away with the creativity and the innovation that Julie and her team came up with to really serve customers in this COVID environment in a safe way. And so, Julie, tell us more about some of the things that you've done, because again, I think King County is a real model for the rest of the country on ways that you can make a safe in-person voting experience.
As soon as we finished the March presidential primary election, we immediately got to work on making preparations for our upcoming August primary and our, of course, big November general election, our presidential election. So we've been really hard at work. I have the most amazing people I get to work with. I think that is true of every election administrator across the state and the ones that I've met across the country. But the King County team of election administrators, so innovative, so dedicated, and hard at work really making sure that we can make this process safe for our voters, but also safe for our team, safe for our staff as well. So when you come to King County elections and you've been before, you will see a lot of plexiglass added to the facility. If people are familiar with the facility, we have a plexiglass 1/5 of a mile loop across our ballot processing area so that people can observe and watch the process. Well, we have added a lot more plexiglass, and that is plexiglass keeping our staff safe from one another. So there's a lot of that happening, and at our customer service opportunities as well. If an individual comes into a vote center or to our office, they will see plexiglass. They'll of course see staff in masks with their PPE. We're also doing temperature check of our staff and those individuals like Secretary Wyman when she came into the facility that are going to stay a little bit longer. So we'll do temperature checks. Of course, we're making sure that we have sanitation stations where we're having all of the supplies, all the hand sanitizer, the gloves, and making sure that people are taking breaks to wash hands. And what we're really, I think voters are going to see that's really different going into this presidential election is the vote centers that we're securing across the county for individuals that need to come in person are ginormous vote centers. So we have identified, think sort of, event center style locations that we're going to be hosting our vote centers so that we can keep staff and our voters at a safe distance from each other. For example, we were at CenturyLink Field Event Center. We'll be back there again for this general election. It is ginormous and it provides an opportunity for everyone to make sure that they are distanced. And so a lot of work that we're working on at the elections office just to make sure, again, that everyone is staying safe. We've had the great opportunity for my IT director. She made sure that we all had laptops a couple of years back and that's the computer that we would be using. So we were relatively quick in being able to leave the office in March and been telecommuting ever since. Of course, we're in the facility and other facilities in preparation as we conduct the elections. So I think some of those are some of the biggest changes. How about you, Kim? What are you guys doing in regards to COVID?
Oh, very similar threads. Now, of course, our role, I didn't talk a lot in the beginning about the Secretary of State's role. Julie hit most of it, but we are still doing reviews of the counties that are conducting elections. We have, I can't remember, besides King County, I know we have a few, but my crew has to do the initiative and referendum petition process, receiving those petition sheets and doing the check. We did have a referendum that was filed earlier this year and did a full, actually we did a random sample of that signature gathering, and it did qualify for the ballot. We are currently working on the statewide printed voters pamphlet that will go into every household in the state and will be delivered early in October. And that work is, as Julie knows, it's a lot of work. You've got to get all the candidate statements and all of the pro and con statements for the issues and measures on the ballot. And then you have to translate it into multiple languages, and you need to make sure everything is perfect. So that's what my crew is working on right now. And we are doing it in a socially distanced environment when they are in the office. We have half of our team in 3 days a week and the other half 2, and then they rotate. And that's one of our control measures, because should someone get exposed and we have to quarantine, we don't have to quarantine the entire crew. And And I think that's really amazing and remarkable. The team is just doing wonderful things like logic and accuracy tests in the primary. They did go out across the state and conduct those tests of the tabulation systems with the counties. So the work continues, and like I think every county in the state, because we've been doing continuity of operation plans for, quite frankly, cybersecurity and for the most part, but for events like a hurricane or an earthquake. Hopefully we don't have an hurricane, but the way this year is going, it could happen. Flooding or a pandemic. And so I think all 39 counties, and I know my office, we did spin up our COOP plans, and we did actually start using them to try to figure out how we were going to navigate through the pandemic. And one of the things you didn't talk about, Julie, which I thought was the coolest part of your day, was the curbside service.
Yes. Yes, Kim. A lot of counties, including King County, provided curbside service for our voters. So both at CenturyLink Field and our Renton office, you didn't need to get out of your car. We could serve you right from your vehicle. So we prepared parking lots with lots of cones and lots of direction to safely serve our voters, again, from the comfort of their own car. And we saw that happening across Washington State, right? I mean, we saw so much innovation. We saw, I think, Benton County at Chuck E. Cheese. We saw Pierce County doing curbside service. We saw Thurston County at their local college. And so we saw a lot of innovation across the state of how to make sure to provide those services in a safe manner in COVID for our voters and for our staff. It makes me think, Kim, that I think we have, about 10 more minutes or here that, what do you think about diving in a little bit to what people should know going into this election? Mm-hmm. Kind of get to the brass tacks. Okay.
Like we said, we're election geeks. What can we say?
An opportunity to give people information about, yes.
Right. Well, I think one of the strengths of Washington's vote by mail system and having the years to really ramp it up properly is the control measures that we have in place. And I think one of them that people just don't realize we do until they go and observe an election operation in a county is that we check every single signature on every envelope that comes back to the voter registration signature on file. And I mention that because I've noticed on social media, the few times that I go on it, that, this is a real, reference point of voter fraud and vote by mail elections are just willy-nilly. Nothing about what we do is willy-nilly. In fact, the beauty of the improvements that every county in the state has made over the last 10 years, 16 years, if you want to go back to the 2004 election, is that we can account for every single ballot that's returned by a voter. And not only account for it, we do reconcile that at the end of the election. And by we, I mean the counties, but they turn that into the state. And that reconciliation really shows how many ballots were returned, which ones were counted, not which individual ballots, which voters' ballots were counted, if the voter's ballot was rejected, why it was rejected. We couldn't do that in 2004. And I say we, I mean every county in the state. We were going so fast and hard that we were just trying to make it work. And I think that is probably the single best improvement we've made, is having that ability to really have accountability for ballots and build out a relationship with our USPS that I think, again, is a model for the rest of the country. Do you have anything to add? I kind of crossed over into your world, Julie, but what else do we do?
I think, another concern I think is that we're hearing, of course, is out of, United States Postal Service. Kim, I think we should definitely dive into that. That has definitely been in the news as of late. And we also just saw some postcards go out to voters or to everyone in the country from the United States Postal Service. So I think what people should know is, as Kim noted, is that we have been working really hard for a long time with our local partners here in Washington State at the United States Postal Service. And that lends us, puts us in a really great position, right? We have worked many, many elections now, vote by mail with our partners there. And I am really confident going into this presidential election that our voters are going to get their ballots on time, and that the ballots are going to come back to the elections office in a timely manner. But I will still encourage every single voter to vote early. There's no reason why not. So go ahead and make that vote plan. I think that that's something that's also really exciting, is to make a plan. You can already go online right now, figure out how you want to vote, and be prepared for our ballots that are going to come out in mid-October. But I think that when we talk about the United States Postal Service, some exciting things is that we're tracking ballots, right? At least in King County, we have an intelligent mail barcode on ballot pieces that are going out to our voters. Likewise, when voters send their ballots back, if they use the United States Postal Service, we have that same intelligent mail barcode, so we can track per piece, per ballot through the mail system. So if an issue was to arise, we would know when and where, and we could resolve it immediately. I think that's really important for voters to know. I also think it's important to note that just in our primary election that was not even a month ago, was that 99.96% of voters in King County received their ballots within 5 days of us mailing them. And that is really in alignment with what they offer for postage. I think a lot of counties, and Kim probably talked to this, is using first class, right? And so we're really making sure, and we've been meeting monthly, daily, weekly with the United States Postal Service to make sure that we're in constant communication to ensure that our voters don't experience any delays in their ballots. Of course, there's also the opportunity to use drop boxes. There's 450 plus drop boxes across Washington state. And that means over 80% of voters have a drop box within just a few mile radius of their home. And in King County, we've got 73 drop boxes that we can open as soon as ballots go out. So we know voters are going to get their ballots about October 19th. If they don't have them by October 19th, they should call 296-VOTE if you're in King County, or reach out to your local elections office. But people should feel confident in the United States Postal Service. I feel confident in their ability to manage our mail and our ballots. I think when we talk to them, Kim, they throw out some really great data, right? You and I are both number and data geeks. And so when they talk about that, this is really a drop in the bucket compared to what they normally mail out if we think about the holidays. So I do have confidence there. Kim, how about you?
Oh, absolutely. And I think, Julie hit it on the head. For the USPS, our big mailing, because we'll probably by the end of the election mail somewhere around 5 million ballots out to voters, from the first initial mailing to all of our registered voters to all of the replacement ballots that will be sent after that. And for us, that's a big number. I mean, let's face it, 5 million is a big number. For the USPS, that's kind of a day at the office. And I got that straight from the president of the United Postal Workers, Mark Diemenstein, that, that's for them, it's kind of like, get off me, flea. Yeah, we can handle this. So we've been working very closely with our representatives here in Washington State. A number of things I'm sure some of you have seen on the media about a letter that went out from the USPS attorney. Within one business day, all 39 county auditors and my staff were on a call with the USPS, and we asked very direct and difficult questions, and they gave us really straight answers. And so we're making a lot of plans to ensure that our voters get a ballot mailed to them in time to vote, and get that ballot back. And I think one of the biggest strengths of Washington's vote by mail system that I'm most proud of is that we have a postmark cutoff. There are, I believe, between 21 and 29 states that you have to have your ballot in the door at the election office by 8 o'clock or whatever the cutoff is during the election. So like Oregon, it's at close of polls 8 o'clock on election night. And here in our state, it's a valid postmark. And in November, that's going to be 20 days after election day when the counties are certifying their elections. As long as that ballot comes in with a valid postmark on or before election day, county election officials will be able to count those ballots. And our experience is, statewide, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of ballots. And it does slow down results reporting, but it is absolutely one of the best ways to enfranchise our electorate, and we're really proud of that. And I know the counties work incredibly hard to process ballots as quickly as they can during election week to give meaningful results early. But ultimately, our job is to get it right and make sure it's accurate. And that's what I think they do such a great job of processing the millions of ballots that we will process. And to give you context, for those of you who are not in the trenches, we're anticipating probably 4.6 million people, somewhere in there, statewide, to return a ballot in the November election. And what we see in terms of a trend usually is election week, 50% of the ballots come back. So Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. What we saw in the presidential primary was 60%. So we're looking at probably, not to stress Julie out, but she and I are doing probably between 2 and 2.3 million ballots will come in election week statewide. And so right now, counties are working to build out that capacity and capability to make sure that we get as many of those processed as soon as possible accurately. And I think the last thing I would just want to mention on this postal topic is, we're combating misinformation and disinformation. There is no doubt. It's coming from all sides. It's coming from the White House. It's coming from USPS itself. In fact, today there was a mailing that started hitting yesterday, but today we saw it full force statewide, a postcard from the post office reminding voters to request their absentee ballot. So basically now every election official in our state and the other 8 states that are going to be conducting vote by mail elections in November are now having to get information out to our voters to let them know, no, you don't need to request an absentee ballot. You're going to be mailed one. Just make sure your address is up to date. That's probably the most important thing you can do. So, wow, it's perfect. Look at Leonard is just entering in. So great segue.
Kim, I think we should also note too that you can track your ballot. So if you're worried about where your ballot is at in the process, you're worried that we've received it, or if there's a signature issue with it, you can track your ballot. And I think that that's just a really, really cool feature and a really great way to ensure that your ballot has been counted. And if there's any question, that's what election administrators are here for. So we want you to call us and to reach out if you have any questions or concerns going into the election.
Wow, that was tremendous. I feel like I am an election geek right now, and I have a feeling that every one of our many audience members wants to join me because you guys are inspiring, informative. That was amazing. I learned, hey, we have so many questions that I'm going to dispense with all my pontifications and go right to the audience questions. And they seem to be kind of gathered in a couple of different clusters.
Okay.
But first, since I'm a history guy, I'll start with the 2 real simple history ones. I mean, they'll be simple for you. When did we first start mail-in voting? Because in Washington State, in this uniform sort of way, was there a year that sort of was the starting point?
Kind of 3 points on the curve, I think. I think really we started down the path in the early 1980s when voters living with disabilities and seniors were able to become permanent absentee voters. And like I said, 1993 was when it really exploded, when that opened up to all voters. And by the late 1990s, I think that was really the tipping point. As we look backwards and you look, and you do that armchair quarterbacking, when you hit 60% of your voters voting by mail, you're already a vote by mail county, you just don't know it, or state in many states' cases. And so, and then, like I said, in the aftermath of the 2004 election, the legislature gave us the authority to do it county by county. And then by 2011, the entire state was vote by mail.
Okay, so 1993, that was the date I thought. Now here's a real technical one, but I had to ask it. Optical scanning, when did that begin? Is that a trick question?
It's not trick. I think
Okay.
I think most of us that are old enough and we're in college in maybe say the 80s remember, even going back to the 60s, remember the Scantron forms that you filled out to do a test. So the technology really goes back to the 1960s. For voting purposes, I think it really took off in the 1980s. Punch card ballots became very fashionable in the 1980s, and then optical scan technology kind of kicked in the late 80s and became very fashionable in the 1990s. And then digital scan has been really the next generation for paper ballots like we have here in Washington State. We didn't mention that one of the big security features of vote by mail is paper ballots. And those are good to go back to. We've learned that the hard way.
Old school paper.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Julie, some of the questions were around trust, and let me see if I can kind of collect them together. People, and you guys have both answered this really well, but maybe just ask it again because people are concerned. How do we ensure the accuracy of the voting rolls? And how do we make sure that if technical things, like if a signature isn't clear, how do we evaluate that? And how can we trust that the election is going to go really smoothly in terms of the mail-in system.
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. I think I would love Secretary Wyman to chime in as well, because really keeping our voter rolls clean is a responsibility of every single one of us, even if you're not an election administrator. And so there is a lot of work that's happening behind the scenes, if you will. With the voter registration system, we're making sure that we're keeping voter rolls clean by comparing them not only across all 39 counties, but we have also in Washington State been part of a consortium called ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration Information Center, where we're comparing voter data rolls from state to state. We have, I believe it's 31 states, Kim, at this point, where we're comparing data. So we're ensuring not only that we don't have people registered in Washington State multiple times, but that we also don't have people registered in those other states multiple times as well. We're looking at and using data from Social Security Administration, Public Health, Department of Licensing, the United States Postal Service. I know even with our GIS software, we're using 911 data points, right? There's so much data that's coming in to make sure that we keep only one voter in the voter registration system, that they are, of course, alive and voting, and that we have done, I think, a considerable work in that. I think the last 16 years, I think what we've seen is Washington State actually become a leader in the nation in having accurate voter rolls because of how much data scrubbing is happening behind the scenes. And I'll let Secretary Wyman speak to all the work that really her office does in those regards.
Well, I mean, it's a partnership with the counties, and Julie really hit it all on the head perfectly. Remember, right now, especially with all of the politicization of election administration, there's a lot of talk about things like purging voters and inflated rolls and all of that. Remember that 10% of our population moves every year. So think about that over a 4-year election cycle from presidential to presidential. 40% of your election rolls have moved and changed their address. And so that's a constant effort. That is probably the thing we do most on top of registering new voters, is keeping the data we have current. And then that secondary tier is we don't purge people. We haven't done that since 1993 when the National Voter Registration Act was passed into law. When President Clinton signed that into law, we eliminated that every 4-year purge of voters following a presidential election, where if you didn't vote, you got taken off the rolls. Now there are many, many things that have to happen, and much notification that has to happen from the state or the counties. And that's all to ensure that we don't remove someone erroneously. But we can also keep those rolls updated. But it is a constant effort, and we definitely need your help. Every single person watching this right now should remember that you can go to votewa.gov right now on your phone, and you can verify that your address is up to date. And I'm not just talking about your mailing address, your residential address. We want to get you the right ballot on the first try at the right address. A lot of times people move and it doesn't cross their mind until the election. So right now is a really good time to remind your friends and family to update your registration, so that when King County and the other 39 counties do their mailing, they're mailing it to the right address.
We didn't touch on the signature piece.
Go ahead, Julie.
Leonard, do you want to touch on the signature piece there, that second part of your question?
Yes, that would be wonderful, Julie. That was the question you had.
So I can't help myself. I just do want to say that there's not fraud happening in vote by mail. I just testified before Congress a couple weeks back, and the percentage I was to use, I don't always say it that eloquently, is but 100,000th of a percent. 100,000th of a percent was the voter issues that we saw in 2018 here in King County. And what that means is that when we compared our data in King County to 30 other states, we identified that there were 17 individuals that potentially looked like they had voted twice in that midterm election. And so we referred that to the prosecuting attorney's office. So I just want to make sure before we leave that subject is that I know Secretary Wyman and I are both on the same page, is that voter fraud isn't happening in vote by mail. The signature issue. Signatures are how we verify that you voted your ballot and no one else voted your ballot. And so one of the things that we are doing is we're being proactive. In King County, if we start seeing your signatures starting to look different than what you're returning on your ballot, we're going to reach out to you before an election so that we can get that fixed or get an updated signature on file. But the beauty of it is that we'll keep all these signatures on file, a scrapbook of your signatures that we can use in an election. But that is how we ensure that you voted and only you. If there's any concern with your signature, we're going to call you, email you, and snail mail you. If we have your email and your phone number, which is why we ask for it on the back of that return envelope, we do not share that with anyone else, no campaigns or anyone. It's illegal for us to do so, and so we don't. But it's important that we get that information so that we can reach out to you. I can tell you that I have had my signature challenged twice over the years. Most recently, when I first got elected and got a new pretty signature that I felt like I needed. So it was a letter to me, from me, with my signature challenge. So it does happen to all of us, and we just want to make sure that we're getting it right.
And I would just add two things. One, not only does that really empower our voters to not have their ballot rejected just because of an administrative, decision, they can have a chance to cure their signature. It is actually a fraud check too, because imagine if you got a letter from King County Elections that said, hey, your signature on your ballot doesn't match, Leonard, and you hadn't voted. I guarantee you are on the phone right away saying, hey, that's not my ballot. I didn't vote yet. And then Julie can actually investigate that and prosecute it. And so it's a dual match. And to give you context on the statewide level in terms of fraud, in that same election comparison that Julie talked about, we did that statewide as well. And we saw, we did find 142 potential double votes or people voting on behalf of deceased family members. That was out of 3.2 million ballots cast. 0.004%. Is it perfect?
Right.
Absolutely not. It is not rampant fraud. And I stand by that just as much as Julie does. I think that our system works well.
Yeah. I mean, I think you guys have answered that so incredibly well. And I think we can all really take pride in what this state and our community has done over these many years. As a historian, I get to read about old elections back in the 19th century or the early 20th century, and they were wild and woolly compared to today. So we can be very proud of what we've got. There are a couple of questions that have to do with some technical aspects that might be downsides. Are either of you able to talk a little bit about how we can make vote by mail work really well for the sight or hearing impaired? And then I'll tag on to that with another question. Someone asked about, what about those people who don't have permanent addresses? Maybe they're without housing right now. How can they exercise their right to vote in a mail-in system?
Julie, go ahead.
You bet. So some of the ways in which we ensure vote by mail and elections in general is accessible for all of our voters with disabilities. We provide a couple different opportunities that include vote centers. So every county across the state still has to have accessible voting units in their office. So one opportunity is to go to your elections office or to reach out to your elections office to find out if they have any vote centers, to go in person. Those machines have adaptive equipment, so sip and puff, a braille keypad to be able to hear it, to make the ballot even larger. And then what we have is our online ballot access. And so that way, from the comfort of your home, voters can use their different reading devices that they already have on their computers. They can enlarge the ballot, and they can vote in the comfort of their own home. I wouldn't say that either one are actually a perfect system. I think that this is something that we continue to work on. I know that one of my legislative priorities has been around how to better help our voters with disabilities make their voices heard without having to rely on anyone else to do that. So we do have the in-person opportunities with the accessible units, and then we have the online system, online ballot access as well.
Yeah, and then also just, translating materials into usable formats for people, making an audio voters pamphlet, for example, available to someone that wants to have an audio version rather than something visual. And each county, by the way, and the state has a advisory, I can't remember what the acronym is, but a committee of advisors to help navigate what are things that are going to meet people's needs and are going to make voting more more accessible. And I think that that has been one of the things, again, that has put Washington on the forefront. For example, all of our web services and the VoteWa system are available in an accessible format, so people can use whatever device and technology they're used to and that they use in their own home or at work or whatever. So, but it's always something we can improve on.
And in Washington State, we have laws around, you don't actually have to have a traditional residential address in order to get registered. So people that are experiencing homelessness or transient, you don't have to have a residential address to get registered again in Washington State. We're looking for a cross street. We're looking for an intersection in which where you identify is where you rest your head, so that we can make sure to get you a ballot with the right issues on it for you that are relevant, right? So if that it had City of Seattle issues on it versus, you know, City of Renton issues. And so we need to have that cross street, but we do need to have a mailing address because we are vote by mail. But that can look like general mail delivery to the local United States Postal Service. It could be mailed to a shelter or to a friend or family member. And we partner with our organizations across King County that are helping people that are experiencing homelessness. We're providing ballot drop boxes there, making sure that we have stacks and stacks of voter pamphlets provided to those shelters so that they can have the opportunity. We'll mail a lot of ballots there. And so I think that we have some good laws around people that don't have traditional addresses.
Well, and I also have a dovetail on that. It's not just people experiencing homelessness. One of the real challenges that we have in our state has been the non-traditional addresses on tribal lands. And it was very difficult to meet that need because we really, on our old systems, and each county had its own legacy system, had tables and street files. So it was street ranges. And so if you had, you know, acres and acres of land on tribal land that didn't have traditional addresses, it was very hard to figure out how to cite those voters into precincts. And one of the things I'm really proud of what the VoteWa team developed when we brought that system up is we now have geocoded mapping. So we can drop a pin, just as Julie was saying, you know, if we have someone who is you know, living at a cross intersection street, we can drop a pin where they live. We can do that on tribal land as well now. And so we've seen some just extraordinary implementation, like in Yakima County, where Charles Ross has worked with the leadership in the Yakima tribe, Yakima Nation, to not only be able to do that non-traditional addressing and make sure people are precincted correctly, but they have the ability to receive their ballot at the community center there, and there's a drop box there. And so it's really meeting each community where they are and trying to figure out what the hurdles or barriers might be, and then working together to overcome them so that we really make voting accessible for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And we had an important piece of legislation, Secretary Wyman, I think, that passed the state legislature in the last session to make sure that those Native communities did have the opportunity to vote without traditional addresses. Just another advance that Washington has. I know we're running short of time. There are so many, I got to just say, can people contact your offices? I have so many questions here. I think everybody in the call has a question. Some of them are very specific. Like somebody got in.
We're going to be here all night.
There you go. We're going to be talking.
No.
Okay.
We are absolutely not going to do that. But
Okay.
somebody, here's a little technical one. But seriously, can people contact your offices? And is there a simple email address that you're able to share with us right now? And people will take note because there's some very detailed questions here. Julie, what's your office's email?
I recommend people either call 296-VOTE or go onto our website, kingcounty.gov/elections.
Excellent. Thank
and
you.
I'll type in.
And Kim?
Well,
in chat, you can,
again, I just put it in the chat room, but you can, the email address I put there, kim.wyman@sos.wa.gov. You can also go to the Secretary of State's webpage, which I believe is sos.wa.gov, and you can also go to just votewa.gov, and any of those places will get you there. One of the things I think we should mention too, because I know we're running out of time, is we are participating with a national effort to combat misinformation and disinformation, and it's called #TrustedSources2020, excuse me, Trusted Info. My comms director right now is head explode. You can hear it. Yeah, it just exploded. #TrustedInfo2020, and the idea behind that is that if you need information, go to your local election go to the Secretary of State's webpage, go to news sources that you can trust, like the network newses, and you get that information from a trusted source. Just because it's on Facebook doesn't mean it's real. I know it's going to shock everybody on this call.
that is great. Let's see, a couple more real quickly while we have you here, because this is such a unique opportunity. This is an interesting question. Moving beyond just voting by mail, what about the initiative and referendum signature gathering process during the pandemic? How is that impacting our democracy? That's a big question in a 30-second answer.
Okay, I'll go quick, and I'll let Julie, because I know they have an initiative and referendum too. Statewide, we did see a referendum number 90, that did qualify for the ballot during the height of COVID, and they did that with traditional signature gathering on paper. We have had some interest by a couple of initiatives to do electronic signature gathering, and right now we're working with our lawyers on answering that question. I think we have to be really thoughtful, because one of the things I would hate to see is if we did this in this environment and then it opened the floodgates to allow it for future initiative and referendums, that we could see a ballot with 20 initiatives on it because the signature gathering was easier. So we have to be really thoughtful in how we move forward, but I think we are certainly exploring all options.
Mm-hmm. And as we look at, a number of questions have been about, our state and our county have some great systems in place. We're looking at all these other states. You mentioned the eastern states are a little bit behind us, who are struggling to kind of rapidly catch up. How's that looking for these next couple of months? Are those systems going to be as reliable and trustworthy? A couple of our viewers had questions about that.
I think so. You got to remember that Julie and I are part of a club of about 10,000 independently elected or appointed officials across the country of all political stripes, Democrats, Republicans, independents, and our whole purpose is to uphold our oaths, to uphold the laws and our state constitutions and the U.S. Constitution and the federal laws. And, that they are just as passionate as we are. I will be very honest with you. That's been my experience. And I think we're all scrambling to try to make a safe voting experience for every one of our voters and do it in whatever way we can. And it's going to get probably messy. It's not going to be the prettiest election, but I can tell you that we're going to work really hard to make sure it's the most accurate and timely election of our careers anyway.
That's cool. And Julie, real quickly for you, when will ballots arrive in people's mailboxes?
Voters in King County should have their ballots by October 19th. So they're going to go out 19th. October 14th. Everyone should have them in their hands by October 19th. And I'm challenging all of my friends and family that I can harass and neighbors to get that ballot in before October 30th. As Kim mentioned, first of all, election results have never been certified on election night. Even though the media might want you to believe that, it's not the case. But if you get your ballot in a couple days before election day, you're certain to have your votes reflecting on those election night results. Of course, we're going to keep counting ballots for another 3 weeks after that, and every voice will be heard. But get them in early, and then you're going to see voter pamphlets, Kim, right? You're going to get a voter pamphlet from Kim. You're going to get a voter pamphlet from me. So you're going to have 2 voter pamphlets and 1 ballot. So you're going to have 3 different items that you're going to receive mid-October. So obviously the Secretary of State's voter pamphlet's going to have all those state issues, all the presidential candidates, and then your local one from me is going to have some judges and some local ballot measures. So you'll have all those materials, but you really don't need to wait. I really do encourage people, make a vote plan today. Go online to votewad.gov and make sure you are registered at the right address. Ask all your friends and family and neighbors to do the same. Go ahead and go online right now and read up on the candidates and the issues and decide, start making those decisions about how you're going to vote. And then that way, when you get your ballot in mid-October, you are ready, set to go. And remember, in Washington State, you don't need a stamp. You're going to use a drop box or the mail. It doesn't cost a thing. Just make sure to get it returned and make sure to sign. And just a side note, majority of the signatures that we have on file in Washington State come from the Department of Licensing. So if you're wondering, how did I sign? My signature is different every time. I know the feeling. Use that ID as kind of your guide for how you sign for us.
Wow, that's It's so amazing how much work goes into this, and how really the whole system is just so impressive and inspiring. It really is the most important thing we can do. Somebody asked a question. We're going to do this on another program. When do we do voting online? Remember, we had that little episode in King County where we got to practice. I won't make you answer that question unless you have a really short answer on that. Any future for voting online?
Not
The secretary's shaking her head.
not anytime soon. No.
No,
No.
I would
No
just
time soon.
clarify that was the King Conservation District, a side election, not a King County election one. But I will say, in regards to technology, listen to this little segue over here. Is a lot of counties have cameras in their office showing you us hard at work. Another way in which to provide transparency to the election process. So you can jump online to kingcounty.gov/elections. And I know other counties are out there working on it as well. We've got cameras right there where you can watch us hard at work. Since with COVID, we don't get so many opportunities to tour people in the office.
Well, I just cannot thank Secretary Kim Wyman, Elections Director Julie Wise so much for this really informative program. I think we're all going to go into this election season now better informed, better equipped, and we've been given our marching orders to get that vote plan. I've not heard that phrase before, that vote plan developed and then executed. And voting is our most sacred right and responsibility as American citizens. An awful lot of people have fought and actually given lives for centuries to make this democracy work through the vote. And it is up to us now to make sure that that system continues to get strong and stronger. I want to thank you both again. I want to thank For Culture, there was our special sponsor tonight, all the sponsors of our Stand Up Seattle Democracy Project initiative, who have been so very helpful. If there's something you heard tonight that you're interested in learning more about, both Kim and Julie have given us their email addresses and their websites. You can do the same with MOHI. We'd love to invite you to become a member of MOHI. We've got a whole fall season of programming and exhibits, and many of you have donated to MOHI as you signed up for the program this evening. We thank you for that, and of course, welcome you to do even more of that if you want to. I'm looking at my notes here as we say goodbye. I think that may be it. We've got a whole bunch of cool programs coming up. I don't know if we're going to show any little promotions on that. Oh, no, wait, we do have a good one coming up, but I specifically want to mention this. Do you all know Ron Chu, the wonderful Ron Chu, who was the founder of the Wing Luke Asian American Museum and such a great guy? He's written a book called My Unforgotten Seattle. It's his perspective as an Asian American and Chinese American, and he will be at MOHI's History Cafe this coming, I'm saying Wednesday the 16th. That seems like it's forever away. No, that's Wednesday the 16th. And more information at mohi.org on that. But hey, when is the election? What's the election date? I'm blanking. It's what? It's early, right? What is it? November what?
November 3rd.
November 3rd. Okay. That's
51 days.
Plan.
51 days.
51 days.
Sounds so beautiful.
All right. Okay. you guys will have a lot of work. Just again, thanks to Secretary Wyman and Director Wise, and to everyone who joined us this evening. We hope you have a safe and a pleasant evening and weekend, and we'll see you at our next MOHI program. Good night.